Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann, and today we are thrilled to welcome someone who made her debut while singing at the age of 10 at the New York City Opera, her Broadway debut the following year, and played the part of Chava in the beloved musical Fiddler on the Roof. Please help us welcome Neva Small. Neva, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, yes, here we are all together.
Well, to start with, you grew up in New York and come from a performing family. Your mother was in an all-female orchestra, and your family was friends with Leonard Bernstein?
Yes, Leonard Bernstein. And yes, my father was quite a bachelor, and he got married quite late in life. And so he did a lot of, wonderful things that a bachelor such as my husband would do. And he was on a cruise. And that's where he met Lenny and Lenny's father, Samuel Bernstein. And Lenny was about 15 years younger than my father. They, of course, lived in Brookline, Massachusetts. And my father was in New York with a nice apartment. So when Lenny wanted to come to New York, he was mature and sophisticated even as a teenager. They would send him to stay with my father. My father would rent a piano for him, and they would go to shows and lots of other things like that. And then my mother was a harpist. So much, much later, when they were dating, all she ever heard about was Lenny. And then finally, he got his break at the Philharmonic, where he was assistant conductor. She met him, and she realized why she was hearing so much about him. He became best man at their wedding, so that kind of thing.
Wow.
He was a mensch.
Oh man, that is absolutely incredible. Well, what was Bernstein like?
A mensch, totally.
Yeah.
He always had a feel for my father, and eventually I got cast in the Mass, which was the piece that he wrote that Jacqueline Kennedy asked him to write in honor of her husband John Kennedy, and it opened the Kennedy Center in Washington D.C. It was a very big piece. It had the Alvin Ailey dancers in it, had the group of soloists, of which I was cast to be in. I guess a little nepotism there, but I did have to carry a tune. And lots of musicians, and it was, very much like, I guess you would say it was a grandchild to the musical Hair. Stephen Schwartz wrote a lot of the libretto, but, it was a very anti-war piece, but lots of dance and music. It's still done. It's a big piece. So that was exciting that, to be a part of that and open the Kennedy Center. So yes, and all in all, he never forgot his old friend, my dad.
Well, was that the opera, the one the one with Beverly Sills' daughter? Is that the one?
No. This was the Leonard Bernstein's Mass that opened the Kennedy Center. With Beverly Sills, such as you did, I worked as a stage child because the New York City Center Opera still was in existence. It's no longer in existence. And so I was cast in 3 American operas, one of which was the Ballad of Baby Doe, and Beverly Sills sang Baby Doe. Again, these were all American stories. And so I still remember the aria. And later on, she saw me in Broadway, and she said, "Hold on to those pipes, kid." Another wonderful, wonderful person. And she did so much for opera in America, making it popular. And she too was a stage child.
Wow. Well, so we said at the beginning, you also made your Broadway debut at quite a young age, and you were just talking about that for Jules Stein. So how did that come about? And were you nervous? I mean, did you realize what a huge feat it was to appear on Broadway at that age?
Well, I guess how much does a kid really know? And yet, on the other hand, stage kids have to be aware of these things. They're competing for roles. They have to understand something about the business side of show business, a little bit anyway. In my case, I had a stage mother in the best sense of the word. As my mother used to say, there are no stage children without stage mothers. But mine wasn't, you know, a pushy one. She just recognized my talent, and here we were in New York, and, you know, being that she'd been a harpist herself, although she didn't like performing. So that was different. And in my case, you know, I still like performing. So, yeah, so I of course I realized it, and working with that group of people, that was Julie Stein, Sammy Fain, and the Marilyn and Alan Bergman. I'm sorry.
So we wanted also your another show, The Impossible Years, co-written by Arthur Marks, Groucho's son, right. And starring. Look at some of the names here: Alan King, Bert Convy, Scott Glenn. What do you remember about that show?
Well, that show I remember a lot about. I think that was the longest run I ever had on Broadway, because, you know, many of the shows that I did on Broadway didn't run 2 years, which The Impossible Years did. So yeah, I remember a lot about that, an awful lot. It was a great experience. Alan King created the role, whoop, and of course, we did the publicity shots at his home in Kings Point, which had been owned by Oscar Hammerstein, and then, you know, working with ultimate professionals. It was directed by Arthur Hill, and people you mentioned, Bert Convy, and Scott Glenn he played the hunk. He played the hunk. So his main role in that thing was to come in and out in a bathing suit around the pool. But I was a teenage girl. I played the younger sister. And eventually Sam Levine took over, who created, you know, Nathan Detroit. And he had done many, many movies, I'm sure you know. And then, so he took over for Alan King, and I, you know, developed a grandfatherly relationship with him. And later, when I went on to be cast in the musical called The Prince of Grand Street, written by Bob Merrill, who had also written Henry Sweet Henry, which I was in, they were looking for a grandfather, and I suggested him, and sure enough, he ended up in this show. But I learned a lot from Sam Levine, and I became friendly with his son. I learned he had his favorites. And one day I came in with the actress playing the older sister. We came in at exactly the same time to the rehearsal. And he scolded the other actress. And then I piped up. I mean, you know, I was pretty young by then, 13-ish. I said, but Mr. Levine, I was late too. And he just kind of grumbled under his breath and never scolded me. But once I had a lunch, he invited me to lunch. He lived in a hotel, and I was 20 minutes late. And that was the last time I was ever late for anything. Because, you know, he had already eaten his lunch, and, you know, by then I was older, you know, a young woman of 19 or something, but I learned. He had an incredible sense of discipline, as did Alan King, but Alan King was much more, he kept to himself. And he had the pressure of carrying the show, and which he did. I did become friendly with Arthur Marks, and in those days we didn't have emails, so it was all pen pal stuff. I have those letters somewhere. Recently, I watched the whole series, the Dick Cavett with Groucho series. Did you watch that? It's really terrific.
I have seen those with Groucho.
Well, Jonathan has seen everything. Well, did you get it? Did you get a chance to meet Groucho?
No, I never met Groucho. No.
Well,
I don't know what his fatherly identity was like. I don't think it was like a typical dad.
I would just on that play that was turned into a movie. Was it kind of like upsetting? I mean, that you were in the Broadway play and then not put into the movie adaptation?
So it would have been nice, but I wouldn't, you know, it wasn't the world's greatest film, and not even Alan King got cast. Right. They gave it to David Niven, so there were changes. I don't think by that time, I don't think Arthur Marks had, or Bob Fisher, the other writer, had much control
Mhm.
over casting and lots of other things.
Hmm. Well, you were in Henry Sweet Henry with Don Amici. So how
That's right.
different and satisfying was it to now have one of the leading parts in a Broadway show?
Oh, that was a wonderful experience. And it was Michael Bennett's second show. And all those wonderful dancers who are still active, like Bjork Lee was in it. Donna McKechnie was in it. And it was written by the great Bob Merrill. I think he's very under-recognized as a pop composer. How much is that doggy? If I knew you were coming, I big cake. And then all these great scores that he went on to write on his own, like Carnival, or in collaboration with Julie Stein, like Funny Girl, which is currently having its revival.
Right.
So maybe he's getting a little more recognition, but he never really got the recognition that he deserved.
Mhm.
So it was great being in that show. Again, Michael Bennett, and Michael Bennett asked my mother, back to my mom and my dad, to put money in his next show. Unfortunately, it wasn't a chorus line. It was
Oh.
Twigs, which she did. She put money in that one, which was lost, of course. But anyway, better luck next time. She liked being an angel, and she liked
No.
being around that world. And she would come to see the shows, as another stage child. She would come to see the shows in those days while we were in previews, and watch my performance. And then as soon as the show opened, that was it. Never came back. But she, in those days, all the critics came on the same night. That was a lot of pressure.
Sure.
Mm.
Well, we do want to, we're going to discuss Fiddler, but before we get into all the questions about your part and the musical itself, Topol passed away last week. He was extraordinary in the part of Tevye, and we had you scheduled prior to that happening, and condolences for his passing.
Thank you.
But yeah, can you talk a little bit about him as a person and as a performer?
Oh, yeah. Well, with his passing, of course, we read even more about him. I was disappointed they didn't have his picture on the Oscars, but
Mhm.
maybe they have a more comprehensive in memoriam section on their website, because they seem to flash a QR code. He was really extraordinary. I mean, when you think his roots were of a family, a father that fled Europe when the trouble started very early on. The rest of the family did not leave to move to Israel as his father did. And then, to think that he was that young and really had very limited English when he played Tevye in London. And that's where Sheldon Harnick recommended him to Norman Jewison, because, as you said, we'll talk about it more, but Norman Jewison was not going to cast Zero Mostel. Talk about not doing a role that you're famous for.
We were going to ask about that, yeah.
Because of his larger-than-lifeness and just a different interpretation. But so in that sense, Chaim Topol was totally self-made, totally. He had done that one film, Salah. He had done a lot of Israeli theater. He'd been in the Israeli service, where they put him into the entertainment unit, even though he didn't start out there. So, and always kept his roots in Israel and New York, and of course the many, many generations of Tevye around the country after the film, so many times, including playing opposite Rosalind Harris in one of the tours. By then, she had graduated from Seidel to Golda, opposite Chaim Topol. Like, that's the way casting is.
Well,
My joke is I'm ready for Grandma Seidel, because they are planning a film,
We were going to ask about that as well.
a
Yes.
second film, and that's Thomas Kail. You saw him sitting next to his wife, Michelle Williams, last night. And well, I don't know that Lin-Manuel will be involved in it, but we know he will. He did the Fosse Verdon. He's a Wesleyan graduate, as is Lin-Manuel. This is a real Wesleyan family. My daughter and son-in-law both went there. Not my other daughter, but my younger daughter. So we're a big Wesleyan family. And yeah, so my friend Olga Meredith, who I saw the other day, Abuela in the Heights, she said, "You gotta make sure you get up for that." I said, "Yeah, for Grandma Seidel." So fun. That part's fun.
Excuse me, but had you kept in touch with Topol through the years?
Yes, and when he would be in New York, he had a friend that lived in the same apartment building, so I would see him in that sense. And then we did a couple of events, the celebrations of the Fiddler anniversary events, which many people were on, but including me.
Well, the Broadway musical came out in '64, so I was reading that you were told not to audition for it at all.
Yeah, by then I had done the things we talked about as a stage child. Yeah, I couldn't get an audition for it. They said I wasn't Jewish enough. And you know who ended up doing it, don't you? Pia Zadora.
Oh, oh no.
So there you go. I don't know. I wasn't Jewish enough, but Pia, I don't know. But Pia, went on to be my understudy in Henry Sweet Henry. So I got to know Pia over the years, and her mom, who was a much more out there stage mother than mine. Kind of the classic.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Wow. Well, did you end up seeing it on stage?
Oh, of course, sure.
Yeah. Well, when did you first start hearing about it going to be made into a movie?
Well, it was 10 years or so, or maybe less than I did on Broadway. The thing, going back to Wesleyan, there was a very young agent at what was then William Morris, became Endeavor and all those other things. And he had just graduated Wesleyan. Now he has given the money for the film lobby there in their cinema. His name is Rick Nisita, and he went on to become very important. But when he first got to the agency after graduating Wesleyan, he wanted to meet every client that was signed, and I was signed at that time to William Morris. And so he called me in, and that was kind of the beginning of, I was also in an off-Broadway play called How Much, How Much? And that play was directed by Richard Altman, and Richard Altman was the New York casting director. So all of those got the door open.
Well, you auditioned for Hodel and Chava, right? And so can you tell us a little bit about the audition process, and you auditioned for Norman Jewison as well?
Yeah, it was 5 auditions. Many of them were in New York, but then it came to the point where it was time for me to do, they invited me to do a screen test. And I had tested for 2 roles. Boy, I'd sure love to see that now, those screen tests. So I tested for Hodel because I was such a strong singer, and tested for Chava, and they tested me with male actors. And so I guess, the chemistry, and, maybe by then they had settled on Paul Michael Glaser, and then the age range would have been off. And, I was the right age for Chava. I wasn't as strong a dancer or singer, but it all worked out.
Well, do you know who else auditioned for your part?
No idea. It's a great question. That is a great question. I know who else auditioned for Perchik because when I did the Hodel screen test, but I have no idea. None. I don't think I want to know.
Well, see, that's funny because like my breakout role at Disney was the movie Escape to Witch Mountain, and I did not know who else auditioned or screen tested for it either until in the last probably 5 or 6 years. And then when I saw the list, I thought, man, thank goodness I didn't know, because I would have been beyond intimidated. These were other very strong child actors at the time. So I think it's a good thing you don't know.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. All right.
At what point did you start meeting and auditioning with the others in the cast?
Well, they never did a chemistry tryout for the daughters. It was only those 2 screen tests, and after the screen tests, that's when I was cast. So I didn't meet everybody until later, except for Mr. Williams. You saw him last night, at the Oscars, and except for, Mr. Jewison and the wonderful casting director who eventually won his own Oscar. I think it was the first casting Oscar they ever gave out, Lynn Stallmaster.
Now, you touched upon it before. There's been this whole controversy when Zero Mostel was not cast in the movie. Now, who originated the role on Broadway? Do you remember any discussion about that when you were filming?
Oh, no, I wouldn't have been privy to that. But this is the perfect segue.
Yes.
Fiddler's Journey to the big screen. It's a wonderful documentary, and it's made by Daniel Graham. His specialty as director is the behind-the-scenes cinema artists. He made Harold and Lillian and a whole series for Criterion about filmmakers of all kinds. The Man on Lincoln's Nose, which was about his professor at AFI, who was the art director on Fiddler on the Roof and all the Hitchcock films, and How to Succeed, Bob Boyle. And so this film is, well, you can hear Norman Jewison himself, because it's really about him, reflect on exactly what you're talking about, the casting process, and why it wasn't Zero, and that Frank Sinatra contacted him. He giggles about that, and thank God he's very much with us. Norman Jewison, John Williams, so good that they are, and of course we did lose Chaim this week.
So you were under 18 when you won the part, and your older sister was your guardian with you on the shoot?
Yes, that's right. I had to find that out. That's interesting. Yes, absolutely. My older sister was my guardian because I had to go before the New York State Surrogate Court and promise that I would come back, and I know I had to finish high school was okay. Or did I? No, I might have had to come back and finish high school, but I had to give my word and defer my acceptance to the Juilliard Drama School, which my mother and I went to see John Houseman. He said, no, you're going to do the film. I mean, he was an actor first. He knew. So.
Wow.
That part of it.
Yeah, just curious about this, because I know New York back in those days was different than California and Los Angeles did. Was it required for you to have do your schooling on set when you were shooting, or were you just off on your own like all the other adults?
No. I guess I was old enough, and maybe I had logged enough high school, or maybe I had finished high school. Maybe I switched to the professional children's schools called Lincoln Square at that time. I don't exactly remember, because I know I'd already been accepted to Juilliard Drama, so that would indicate something. But yes, I did have to get permission from the court, but I did not have to have a tutor on the set.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what is it like now going off? You're still so young now. You're going off to Yugoslavia. And
I was great. I mean, I was young enough and curious enough that I studied Serbo-Croatian, and I could sort of communicate. And of course, we lived in a luxurious hotel. Well, for Europe, it was anyway. And my roommates were Bali Pecan and her husband Yankala, who's also in the film. He plays the Hebrew school teacher, the Cheder teacher. And so that part of it was great, and the other young women, Roz and Michelle and I, of course, became friends, and it was fun. It was a great experience. And then eventually we went to London and did interiors.
Yeah, I always found that fun when they break it up, and interiors are in a studio and the exteriors are, of course, in an incredible landscape like that. But you just mentioned them. What was your relationship like with Rosalind Harris and Michelle Marsh?
Oh, friends, good friends. And, they were very, very close. And I was just young enough not to quite be in that girl talk stuff, but they were very, very close, and we remained friends.
I was curious now, when you were growing up, you were very involved in Hebrew school and Jewish theater. So did being in Fiddler resonate with you in any way, because it was really such a Jewish production, meaning in its depiction of Jewish life?
Well, as my parents told me, it will be your calling card forever. And it has been my calling, Carl. All these years later, over 50 years later, I'm touring the country, the Jewish film festivals, as the co-host of the film festival when they run Fiddler's Journey to the big screen. And I do a talk back after. And I even have designed a PowerPoint called Becoming Chava. And all the things we're talking about, pictures from the set and my screen tests and history of Shalom Aleichem and Mark Chagall. I have all this in a PowerPoint, which of course culminates with underscoring so that we can all sing Fiddler songs together. But it's called Becoming Chava. And sometimes when I go to the communities, the Jewish film festivals are often sponsored by JCCs. I'll do this program for the JCC, sometime for the insiders, sometime for the senior luncheons. They figure, each one figures it out. But in addition to hosting the night or the screenings of Fiddler's Journey.
Well, I hope you get to South Florida with it. So.
I hope so. I really do. Maybe we'll talk later. I'll
Sure.
some leads. Some leads.
Well, it at that point, Norman Jewison had already directed several successful movies. Was there an intimidation factor for you because of that? And what was Jewison like as a director?
Oh, he is the kindest, most down to earth. No, I don't think anyone can find him intimidating. And he had been an actor, and he talks about that himself in this documentary and in the brand new not autobiography. He wrote an autobiography. This Terrible Business Has Been Kind to Me, but the biography is written by a film professor named Ira Wells, who's Canadian, as is Norman Jewison. Norman, he in this documentary, he talks about all his experiences. So you see, he just is a natural actor. He plays Ben Gurion when he's talking about meeting him during the filming of Jesus Christ Superstar. He plays the Southern bus driver when he was like a 19-year-old, had just gotten out of the Canadian service and wanted to tour the United States, and went to New Orleans, and there was some, surprises for a young man like that touring, where to sit on the bus. He does the bus driver, and he met Bobby Kennedy, became very friendly with Bobby Kennedy. So he does the Massachusetts accent. It's just natural. He just laughs because he's really an actor.
Can you tell us a little bit about the production itself and some of your memories filming it?
Well, it took 10 months. I worked on it for 9. 5 of them were in Zagreb, with the former Yugoslavia, and the other 4 months were at Pinewood Studios, is where we shot it. I guess they've gone on to do Harry Potter. Well, it was all challenging, and that's where Chaim Topol comes back into this conversation. The Chava, of course, and her father have the very dramatic scenes in Act 2. And in those days, the film was conceived and run within intermission. But those scenes were a challenge for me, those very, very dramatic scenes. And he was just a great support, to play opposite. That's a pretty important turning point to the story. I guess the antagonist, you could say.
Well, I mean, I can well imagine. I just recently rewatched it, to get ready to speak to you today, and watching the intensity that the intensity you have without having the the words available to carry it was just. I was sitting here with chills, and such an amazing performance on everyone's part, but you especially in those scenes. They were really lovely. Now, did you all get a sense that it was going to be a hit?
Yeah, we, because Fiddler on the Roof was already a legacy, as we talked about, we knew that it was such wonderful material, beautifully sung, orchestrated. I mean, John Williams didn't do musical direction too often. Plus, he wrote the opening cadenza for who else? Isaac Stern. Jack Benny had the joke. They offered me Fiddler on the Roof. They wanted me to play the fiddler, which is funny. But of course, it went to the great Isaac Stern, which was once again Norman's idea. And the Mirisch brothers didn't think that Isaac Stern would accept. But as most of us do, in whatever stage we're at with our Jewish identity, whether you have one parent, two parents, or it is really a touchstone, it really is for the experience. So in my case, yeah, I couldn't have been prouder and continue to be. And I had read a lot of Holocaust novels, true stories, nonfiction, as a teenager, because when I grew up on the Upper West Side of New York, we saw people with the tattoos on their arms, because of course, a lot of refugees lived in New York City. So I would read that, and I had done a Shalom Aleichem TV special on, I don't know, one of the networks. So I had a little familiarity with, and I had been given a volume of Shalom Aleichem somewhere along the line before the casting process. So I still like books like that. Isaac Bashevis Singer, I went on to do a play of his. I've done a lot of plays of Jewish content when I start to think about it. I did a Shana Madel, a wonderful play, and I played opposite Fivers Finkel in Finkel's Follies. And I was either playing in New York theater, I was either playing Cockneys or Jewish. Grand Street, of course, was set in the Yiddish theater. I went on to do The Golden Land, which was an English Yiddish musical. That one also ran for 2 years as Second Avenue House. And all the people involved with that, Zalman Molotek, Moshe Rosenfeld, my friend Joanne Bortz, they all went on to do the Yiddish-speaking Fiddler. I myself am not a fluent Yiddish speaker, but they've had great success with that, and it's been nice. I do sing on the album. I was invited to sing on the Yiddish Fiddler, which had the song as a bonus track that they cut to replace with Matchmaker. Jerome Robbins was such a genius and always fixing the show. So I get to sing that with Rosalind, by the way.
Oh, that's great.
To Marry for Love, it is called. And it was the predecessor to Matchmaker. Just like When Messiah Comes was the predecessor to Anatevka, as Jerome Robbins tightened the show. And I still see Austin Pendleton, too, who I know, and his wife Katina. I saw them not too long ago, the original model. And it's always fun for me when I see the pictures of model Austin, a young guy.
These are people actually that are on our wish list to interview, actually. But you mentioned Yiddish theater. Now I want to talk about briefly, if you can, about the great Molly Picon, who was very much into some of your memories of her, as well as Norma Crane, who played Golda. Some of your memories.
Yeah. Well, as I told you, Molly and Yankel, her husband, Joseph Kalich, I think was his Americanized name, they were inseparable. That was so lovely to see. And of course, I knew of her performances, her crossover performances like Come Blow Your Horn. And I knew of her Yiddish films, and of course, The Cartwheel. And it was a pleasure getting to know them in a grandparent kind of way, and to see that romance after so many years, and that closeness. And of course, I didn't really have any scenes with her, but the behind the scenes. And Norma Crane was a wonderful actress. You probably know more about her. She'd come from the era of television. She knew Norman from that era, because he too was in on it, as was Sidney Lumet. By the way, my friend Maura Spiegel wrote the recent book about Sidney Lumet, if you ever want to talk to her. And so Norma was another wonderful, giving actress, not as secure with her singing, but it's not really a major singing role. And she was diagnosed not too long after the film. So we've had our share, as anybody would when you log this much tread on your tire, of tragedy, including Paul Michael Glazer's wife and daughter, who were, HIV positive from a transfusion of childbirth, and the Elizabeth Glazer Pediatric AIDS Foundation was formed, and his son, thank God, is very much alive. He himself has played Tevye, which you could find on YouTube, and he's fabulous.
Oh, fantastic. We'll have to see that.
That does sound fantastic.
He's really good.
There was another, you mentioned this documentary, Fiddler's Journey. You were in another one. You had a brief part in the other one as well, the A Miracle of Miracles. 50 years, 50 years later, Fiddler is still being discussed and is still loved. What is it about the musical that you feel contributes to its longevity?
Well, it's a masterpiece. I mean, when you think about the construction of a musical, and it's really, as we talked about in Act Two, it's really a musical drama. And that's irresistible score, Bach and Harnick's score, which Bach said was attributed to his grandmother from the old country living with them when she was elderly and he was a child piano student, and he would hear those melodies, so they just kind of poured out of him when he was writing the score. And of course, I am also featured in the documentary all about Sholem Aleichem, called Laughter in the Darkness. And Sholem Aleichem, of course, had a following, and what a great writer. And that film kind of uses a lot of the scenes with Chava, as the take on it is that Chava represents assimilation in Sholem Aleichem's mind. So, but that's a very good documentary, especially if you want to follow more about the creators of Fiddler on the Roof, Sholem Aleichem.
Well, just talking about that, for me, I look at the musical in two different ways. I mean, the musical I loved as a kid and still love as an adult, but I also look at it now as a father. I have 3 kids, 2 of them girls. So I feel deeply about the situations in the film that they, having Jewish daughters. So can you look at the film from a distance and see different things now as an adult as opposed to when you made it as a teen, or because you were in it, you hard to separate yourself?
Well, let's see. Oh, it's nice to hear you're a dad of children, and including daughters. We're living in a pretty rough time right now. I mean, in addition to all the sadness in and around the Ukraine and all the issues in the United States, one of the issues is really, truly the rise in anti-Semitism. And something like this, and you as a parent, it's such a universal story, and it went around the world and it continues to be around the world. That can only be good for the education and raising of consciousness for people who don't know Jews or who have something against them for whatever reason. So in that sense, it's such a representation against all kinds of what we're still seeing, all kinds of racism, bigotry, and also the importance of, Glazer Wolf says Chicago, he's going to Chicago. And of course, Tevye is, everybody have to know we're moving in with your uncle, with your brother, but it does represent what America has to offer, and one would hope still has to offer. We certainly see it in New York, which is totally diverse, and you in Florida, totally diverse cultures. So in that sense, it also represents that. The extension of is all of our grandparents and granddaughters and grandsons. I have sung the Sabbath prayer at my own daughter's bat mitzvah, and I've sung Sunrise, Sunset, a lot of weddings. But it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to do that. So to be part of the culture.
Wow.
I've done the Fiddler on the Roof sing-along co-hosting,
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
I did that in Tucson, Arizona. The same daughter we're talking about was with the JCC at that time. She's gone on to a different kind of career, but she loved it there. So the local art house ran Fiddler on the Roof. I came, I did that program I was telling you about. And then I hosted the trivia contest at intermission, and everybody was told to come in shtetl-wear, and I judged the contest. I've done lots of fun things.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Even recently, a friend of mine had a goddaughter in a production of Fiddler on the Roof. Of course, you could be doing that, all year long, but it was a high school not too far away. My friend is a performer, Richard Skipper. He asked me as a favor. His goddaughter was in it. So I did. And it was so, I thought, how am I going to sit through it, But it was so refreshing. And I watch this every time I go. But it was so refreshing because the cast was totally diverse. And they all wrote about that. Tevye, he was wonderful. He was a teenager, junior, senior. He was of Filipino heritage. And my friend's goddaughter who played Chava, hers is Asian and Jewish. And many, many, many were just Hispanic, but all of them were African heritage. All of them talked about the kinship that they felt as, future immigrants to America, or, children of immigrants to America. So it was really nice to see a diverse production. It was so well done. Beautiful orchestra at the Bergen Academy, directed by Stephen Kaplowitz, who's a playwright as well as teens in theater.
Well, you're still very involved in theater, and you've done cabaret shows. You had a successful one called Not Quite an Ingenue, which I think is a fantastic title.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that? And do you have anything upcoming?
Well, last night I sang in an All Candor and Ebb review, and we did that at the National Opera Center here in New York City. And I sang Fraulein Schneider. And I did the scene, with the actor. And when he comes to rent the room for Fraulein Schneider, and they're negotiating the price. And the song, So What? And so I love doing that. I like to, I'm with the Singer Studio, so we do that. And I am starting to work on the next piece, because now I see from going to all these wonderful JCCs that I have a following there, and it would be my pleasure to develop something just right. I'm going back to Toronto. That's for the Jewish Music Festival in April. I am going to do another Jewish Film Festival very soon, at the end of this month, in West Hartford, Connecticut. And I have lots of roots in Connecticut. We talked about Wesleyan. And then I'm going to Staten Island JCC. They have 2 JCCs, and they're having a Jewish Film Festival. And, I hope to do more of this. So in terms of the next piece past Not Quite an Ingenue, I'm working on that now, and it will fulfill what you're asking me about. I've done a few one-nighters at 54 Below. I played Molly Peacon's role, actually, in Milk and Honey. And a one-nighter in Milk and Honey. I played that role in Summer Stock also, a long time ago. But so, I still do that. Summer Stock occasionally. I played Joanne and Company for one of the Connecticut Summer Stock companies. And I like to work with children and puppets. I do a little bit of that. But I think I'm working on something that has a lot of promise now for this same audience. At Not Quite an Ingenue, I did at the Actors Temple Theater. Now, I'm a member of the Actors Temple, which is on West 47th Street, right in the Actors Broadway district. And when it's not a temple, the same pulpit, bima, alternates as a theatrical space, like the Tuskegee Airmen ran there, and comics use it. And so that's where I did Not Quite an Ingenue. And I still sing at their services. They have what they call Broadway services. In May, I'm going to be doing the gratitude service. And There's one of the composers is also part of the temple who's had a lot of success, Douglas Cohen. He wrote No Way to Treat a Lady and some other things. So I hope to visit one or two of his songs that night in the Gratitude.
Well, when you do, we'd love to have you back. If you want to come on to discuss all that, we'd love to have you.
Okay, but
Well,
off ahead. I'm just starting the research on the other project, but it should be fun.
Well, talking about the remake, we'll end on that. You mentioned the remake of Fiddler. Now, should they approach you about it, would you have interest in doing it?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'll take Olga's advice. You got to chase them down, but it's not so easy. It's not so easy. It's a different world. Everything is, all your auditions are uploaded now, you know, from this very same computer. And you have to find a reader and make sure the lighting, you know, all the things I don't have to tell you, but it's a different world, the world of even auditioning for musicals first round, you know, I still have to compete, you know, as much as I'm loved from Fiddler, I still have to go out there and compete for roles.
They should be banging down your door to ask you.
Oh, you're so nice. Thank you. Extra $50 for you. That's what that comes directly from Five-ish Finkel. That's what he would say when he did something good. Extra 50 for you.
Well, Neva, we want to thank you so much for coming on today. It was such a pleasure. Like, Fiddler's always been one of my favorite musicals. I watch it often, and it always gets me every time. Your scene in particular gets me every time, you know, for different reasons now. And it was very generous of you to come on. And like I said, anytime you'd like to come back, we'd love to have you.
Oh, thank you. Hey, a fellow child actor? I mean, we have to stick together.
Yes.
He did well last night winning his Oscar for
no, that was a red letter night, yes, for our group, you know, because we are rare, especially the ones that continue on to perform throughout their lives. And you know, I, not only being, you know, an alum, I have great respect for, you know, for performers in general, but of course, much more so for the young people who have survived through the business and have gone on to even further success. So, but thank you for that.
Well, here I'll close with this. God would like us to be joyful, even when our hearts lie panting on the floor. Everybody, how much more can we be joyful? To life, l'chaim. Hello.
Well, this has been Pop Culture Retro I'm Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann. And again, a very special thanks to Neva Small. And please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.